Hello, thank you for joining us on the Hill City Podcast. Today we are reviewing and going over last week's message on friendship. Hannah, you want to talk to us just a little summary about what you spoke about and give us kind of like the main things that were most important to you?
Yeah, so we've finished up our series Intertwined, which was all about relationships, and this last one was about friendship. And friendship's kind of a topic, I guess I don't feel like I've heard many sermons on friendship.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily talk about it a whole lot. Maybe it's something we take for granted. I know I take it for granted. But I had just started with kind of listing some friendships that have developed over the years, and then talking about how despite all those memories that I could bring up and the people I could list right now that I have some sort of friendship with in my life at the moment, I often find myself saying to others, it is so hard to make friends as an adult.
Yeah.
And definitely that's been even maybe more true in my life a few years ago. But I think it's interesting that we say that, because I think what we really mean by that is that the process of friendship, of making friends, takes a long time, and it takes a lot of dedication. There's things we have to give up in order to make good friendships, just like in any relationship. But I just talked about 1 Corinthians 13, 4-8, about what love looks like. Paul was not writing this specifically to be used at weddings. It's a great passage to use at weddings, but it's not just about romantic love. It has a much wider scope of love in view. And so we can look at it to talk about what good friendships look like, because ultimately the best example of friendship is Jesus's friendship to us. The Gospel of John talks about this a lot, about how Jesus is our friend who gives up his life for us, and how he no longer calls us servants, but friends. That's from John chapter 15. And we could say the gospel, in summary, is all about friendship. That it is about Jesus forsaking his status and the things that might have separated him from us, and instead coming down to our level in order to lay down his life, make us his friends, and then let us carry the good news of that friendship to others. Now, we could say, well, this is not unique to Christianity.
Yeah.
We could say that
For sure.
if you have a good friend, they're not a Christian, or at a time in life when you weren't a believer, maybe you had a friendship that looked like that. And that's because we carry the image of God in us. You know, there's no secular reason for you to sacrifice for another person unless they can give you something, right? But you can think of a friendship where that happened. And that's because we bear the image of God, and in doing that, we have that capacity for love. But Christians should example most clearly this example of love in friendship,
For sure.
where we are not concerned about status, we're not concerned about what someone else can give us,
Utility.
about the utility of it, but that we are actually concerned about the good of the other person. And the thing is, that has to exist for both people, right?
Yeah.
You can't have a friendship or community of love unless that value is true for both people. You have to have that conviction that you're living out self-sacrificial love. And that's where you see most clearly forgiveness, when two people are forgiving each other. That's where you see most clearly that love isn't easily angered, when two people are willing to let things slide and not always have to have the last word. And we want that love to show up most clearly in friendships, but also in our whole community, that mutual love. I just left with a challenge to do a few things, maybe reconnect with an old friend you haven't seen in a while, maybe connect with someone you think could be a friend of yours. How many times have you had somebody you're like, I really need to get coffee with you, and it's months and months and months, maybe a year has gone by since you've said that several times. I feel like that's really common in our day and time.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just because we're really busy, but that's something to consider too. Are you too busy for friends? Maybe it's having a conflict with a friend. Friendships cannot grow deeper unless you are willing to have honest conversations, and that includes conflict and vulnerability, being really honest with someone where you're at. And maybe it looks like asking a friend you have now what's actually going on with them and being willing to just listen. Just be that person who can listen well to them. And so we see all these traits in 1 Corinthians 13. And yeah, I just think it's important to think through how we can be good friends to others and how we want to grow into the people who can have those types of friendships. Is there anything that stood out to you most from the message or from the passages we went over?
Yeah, I think a lot from the passages. But I really was thinking through, like, the kind of cultural phenomenon of, like, cut toxic people out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you were talking quite a bit about that. It's like, okay, if anyone's toxic, then cut them out. Then you have to cut yourself out at the end of the day, because we all bring a level of toxicity to places, because we've all been hurt. We are all dealing with something. That's what we call sin, right?
Yeah.
But we're all dealing with ourselves, and so if you cut all toxic people out, you and I will be left alone. But I loved how you interweaved how important it is to, maybe it's not toxicity, maybe it's the lack of ability to reconcile.
Yeah.
The lack of ability to forgive and to go into conflict. Because who likes conflict? Especially if you're avoidant attachment, right? If you grew up in a place where you couldn't do conflict, your parents didn't do conflict, and we have talked about this in the past, where a lot of Christian people grew up in homes where they didn't do any conflict, and we said that was great, except we also didn't learn how to reconcile.
Yeah.
We didn't know how to do conflict well, and then to reach over and to
it was
heal.
Safe to do that.
Yeah, we just thought it was wrong to do it. Like, it was sinful to go into conflict. But according to everything I read in the Bible and Jesus himself, he got into a lot of conflict. Yeah. And he was willing to do it, not so that he would be deemed right, but because he wanted that friendship to come back together. And I remember reading something, I forgot who exactly said it, but it was like, if someone hits you on one side of the face, like, you can give them the other. It's not so that you can just, like, do whatever you want, but that friendship, that connection is still worth fighting for.
Yeah.
And I was like, dang, I've never heard it like that. But just to kind of configure the way even we read that, the way why we go 2 miles instead of, going the limited mile. And I know that was a Roman thing back in the day, but just understanding conceptually why we turn the other cheek or go the extra mile or do all those things was, can I keep this relationship going? Am I willing to sacrifice and not just say that is toxic?
Yeah. And I think that's there's some good impulses behind that conversation. Like, maybe it's somebody who has a lack of boundaries, or someone who does truly have a abusive relationship on their hands,
For sure.
or somebody who is recognizing for the first time that this person that they're interacting with really isn't a friend, that the whole time, a lot of it has been expected of them and not really reciprocated in any way that shows love. But you could say, maybe that's not a friendship, but is God actually calling me to walk away from it? That's something for you to wrestle with God. And sometimes the answer may be yes. He is calling you to put up strict boundaries for their good. And he may be calling you to have an honest conversation where you tell them how it makes you feel.
There we go.
Because that would be vulnerable, right? To be able to share how that makes you feel, that they don't seem to care much about you. But yeah, this idea that we can just cut people out of our lives the moment that they show some sort of traits we don't like. If that's the end of the pool we're talking about, yeah, that's destructive, because who are you going to have relationship with at that point? We all are very broken people. Yeah. And we have to decide, is there safety in the relationship to be able to express, hey, I realize that you may have done this because of these things that have happened to you before, but this is how it made me feel. And can you guys work through that? Because you might find, and this is what I had said maybe at the end of that part, was you might find on the other side of that conflict, on the other side of that vulnerability, a much deeper and truer friendship than you've even been able to experience so far.
For sure. And I love how you tied it all together in the sermon. Like, the gospel in itself, Christ in himself is friendship, which is, throws me into a Keller quote, is the gospel is this, that we are so sinful and flawed that Christ had to die for us. Yet at the same time, we are so loved that Christ was willing to die for us. And that, and living in that between, in that friction, and holding both things at the same time is really, really important for us.
Yeah.
Because then we can't walk around with pride and saying, you suck, you're toxic, you're this, you're that, because we look within that Christ had to die for us as well. It brings us back into humility and not just like being crushed by that weightiness.
Yeah. And this may be a place where we can definitely recognize the difference between friendships as a common concept in our culture and friendships in the Christian conception. Because it may be that this person wouldn't naturally be your friend. Like, maybe you have different interests. Maybe you have personalities that really clash in some ways. Maybe there's these other things going on. And it might be that you just, you can't be friends with everyone. Maybe you're not meant to be friends, but could it be that you're actually being called to be Christ-like in your sacrifice, to at least try to understand this person better? Because at the end of the day, even if you wouldn't call it a deep friendship, we're called to love one another. And if love looks like 1 Corinthians 13, what does it look like for you to example that in this person's life, whether or not it turns into a deep friendship? And what does it look like to follow the Sermon on the Mount and turn the other cheek, or go the extra mile for this person? Not because they deserve it. Like, that's not how we rank what we do as Christians, right?
Yeah.
But because Jesus calls us to that.
Yeah, so good. Thank you so much. And just thank you for joining us. And I hope that we dive deeper into the understanding of friendship. Don't just kind of shoo it away and say, oh yeah, I got this. But rather, do some surgery, look within, do some reflecting, do some writing, and see how God would lead us to be the kind of friends that he's calling us to be. God bless you, and thank you for joining us.